All right, for the benefit of those of you who are online right now, we're still working on it. Rocky has shown up and she's going to save the day right now. I just know it. So Lisa is promoting those people who should be panelists. And in just a minute or two, we should have the ability to share video and screens.
Ashley did successfully share screen earlier, so I think we may be able to do that regardless. But as we await further IT communications, Lisa, do we need to do an official roll call and then we can at least start some discussion?
Yes. Roll call, Commissioner Markley.
Here.
Commissioner Townsend. Ashley Hand.
Here.
Commissioner Bynum.
Here.
Commissioner McKiernan.
Here.
Kathleen Von Atchen.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, team. Well, the agenda was shared out previously, but today I think we're going to do a few things. We're going to sort of get an update on where we are once again. We're going to review those immediate needs and then the additional needs. I think we're calling them additional needs to try to separate those from the, oh good, a video. Yes, to try to separate those from the immediate needs we've already funded. So we're going to talk about those additional needs from the health department, and if this committee is comfortable with them, I think that's something we want to discuss to conclusion and decide whether we want to forward those to the full commission for action, for funding action. And then we're going to talk a little more about sort of the commission priorities and whether there are some things that we want to kick off before we get that application rolling for the community and internal departments and such to make applications. So as a commission, we had discussed those priorities previously, and staff thinks there might be some opportunities to have some quick wins and move some things forward as we're awaiting additional information about the remainder of the funding. So that is sort of our agenda for the day. And I don't know who's taking it first, Kathleen or Ashley, but I will hand it off to one of you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to provide a little bit of a background. We had hoped that our new mayor's office would be available for today's meeting, but obviously lots of transition happening, so it may have been too difficult to get this on the calendar. So I will try to not linger too much on the known information, the process to date. I will kind of do a brief recap, but the intent is to kind of just catch us up where we're at today, talk about how immediate needs funding has gone, which was funded through the remainder of this this calendar year, as well as additional county needs that have been proposed that are important to continue our pandemic response into 2022. We'll talk a little bit about the work that has been done over several special sessions with the commission to identify core values, a vision, and initial goals for what our pandemic recovery should look like, and then some recommendations as to how we take that insight and pull it into kind of next steps moving forward as not only the committee, but as a community as a whole. And then we will share with you an exciting announcement about the new small business program, which is launching very shortly, which was part of the immediate needs support that was approved in August. So where are we today? As you know, we have gone through a pretty extensive process in terms of talking through kind of what we want our recovery to look like. We have a lot of data that comes our way in terms of the community survey and various efforts across the community, even through the pandemic, to continue planning and working within communities to prioritize projects and identify opportunities to address some of the systemic inequity and some of the challenges that we as a community have faced in light of the pandemic and the strain on our community. So over those several sessions, we took a look at how can we define the pandemic recovery moving forward within the context of the commission priorities? So these are our North Stars that were established by our elected body to really help guide us. And those North Stars were also applied to what's called a priority-based budgeting approach, which has been implemented internally to help us reduce waste, prioritize spending to align to the commission's priorities, and then ultimately help us kind of understand and guide this process. So this was a snapshot that had been provided at the last special session. This just is an overview as your reference of all the other funds that have come in since the pandemic started. In particular note is obviously the CARES Act funding, which was a very sizable influx of funds to support our community and the response. The other information that the commission had previously requested, and this is here for your reference, are kind of how did the recovery funds get allocated across various jurisdictions within Wyandotte County specifically. You can see there's a specific allocation for Donnelly College and the community college, as well as our school districts. And different than the way that the CARES Act was distributed, where all of the funds came through for the city of Bonner Springs and Edwardsville through the unified government, the state in this case directly allocated the funds to the cities themselves. So our two numbers to kind of really focus on are the city of Kansas City, Kansas, and Wyandotte County. Now we've been struggling with this representation a little bit because rounding obviously causes a little bit of numbers and totals. And I want to assure you that we are working on how do we get this data up on our website so that you can see how money is broken out and how is it spent so far, but also what's available and remaining for funding. So as you can see here, one of the allowances for the ARPA funding was to cover revenue losses that occurred over a specific period of time. And then there are specific categories for how the rest of the funds can be spent. The health department and other departments that are directly on the ground and responding, including many of our community organizations that are working to provide housing assistance during this difficult time. A lot of that funding came out very early on in August through the immediate needs report and that allocation that was approved by our commission. There are remaining funds, which is part of the discussion that this committee is charged to tackle. And as the kind of year end settles we anticipate that even some of the money that was put into our general fund for revenue loss recovery will still be available. And in this case, for the city of Kansas City, Kansas, we anticipate about $9.6 million remaining. So these funds are kind of where we are as an opportunity within ARPA specifically. And I think it's important to note that there are limitations to how the funds can be spent for the local recovery, which these categories have been shared with you in the past, and they're outlined here for your reference, just to kind of give you a guide, because it's really important to look at kind of what is this in the context of other funding, which I will get to in just a minute. And finally, this other resource here is a list of a couple different resources. And when we post this online, these are interactive links. So you can actually go in and see what are other communities doing? How are they prioritizing their American Rescue Plan funds? And then there's some interesting case studies of kind of innovative ways that communities have leveraged, for example, 311 as a 24-hour hotline to respond to the pandemic and how that has changed services moving forward. There's other kind of really great examples out there, and we as a staff are continuing to cull through that, and we're happy to provide this committee with any information that you need to feel like you understand and have good examples to look to if that is of interest. So then I think the important thing about the conversation today is not just the ARPA funds, but thinking about this in context of the other federal funds that are coming as well. So we know a few things. One is that we know that there is often with other federal funds a requirement, for example, to have a local match. So the question could be posed is how do we leverage ARPA as part of that local match to seed future federal funds, whether it's the infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better bill, and other social infrastructure funding that has been outlined or defined at the federal level. The other thing to note is that this money has been in some cases approved, but certainly is not in the bank yet. And so it'll be important for us to be prepared to pursue that funding to really maximize what is already available to us through the federal government. We just need to make sure that we're on top of it and ready to go. So when those funding opportunities come our way, sometimes with very short lead times, that we are equipped with those kind of ready to go proposals. So some of the things that we need to be thinking about is, in addition to defining our recovery priorities, we need to think about who else in the region should we be talking to when it comes to our federal funding, so that we're not competing with other agencies. That sometimes happens, is that multiple people will pursue the same grant across the region. So making sure that we're working quickly within the community to understand who else is out there working on things and either partner with them early, or certainly try to address how we can avoid competing with ourselves to bring this critical funding to our region. And then another component of some of the federal funds are kind of the definition of community benefit agreements and clear partnerships with our community. So there is work to be done to prepare us for those calls for funding applications. So we need to do that legwork sooner than later to ensure that our community is on board and walking in step with us and understanding what this opportunity really is and what types of projects we want to target. This is obviously very much at a glance, but I tried to encapsulate kind of what's happening in this kind of broad range of many different bills and legislation and funding opportunities that are coming at the federal level. So transportation is obviously has been a big one, as is a lot of infrastructure in the infrastructure bill. But we also anticipate, and there are funds out there already, including some that we're pursuing around tourism. There's anticipated more funding around housing, even other social infrastructure such as daycare, early childhood and daycare services, and other kind of very essential things to help get people back to work and our economy rolling for the future. So there's quite a bit here. And I think just to kind of underscore that there are places where there's overlap. So we know that there is stormwater funding, for example, covered within the American Rescue Plan. But likewise, we know that there will be stormwater funding available through the infrastructure bill. So it's important to think about kind of what those kind of opportunities are and where those trade-offs are. That's definitely going to be something that this committee will have to balance as you kind of think about how are you going to allocate money across our various focus areas. So to date, we have defined some with the commission over several sessions, some values and vision and goals for how our recovery should work as a community. And I think, you know, this again, underscored by our overarching commission priorities. So this is not additive, but really much more about focusing in on these specific types of funds and how can we leverage them to really accomplish these goals for the community. And our values that have been defined by our commissioners include equity and collaboration, as well as innovation and resilience. So really thinking about how can we leverage this process as an example of how we want to work with our community in different ways, bring forward innovative solutions that maybe we haven't tried before, but might be able to help us get to the level of transformation that the commission aspires to see. And as well, recognizing that this may be a pandemic that we hope will one day be over, but that these types of catastrophic events and the need for our organization to be resilient and anticipate and be able to respond to future catastrophes has been something that many of the commissioners strongly emphasized in these initial sessions. And so in terms of trying to summarize kind of what the pandemic recovery vision looks like, specifically thinking about the American Rescue Plan funds, is that we hope to leverage this, this funding to ensure that we are future ready. We're ready to go for what comes post-pandemic while continuing to address the ongoing challenges that our community is facing because the pandemic is still here, but also use this as an opportunity to catalyze the growth and the many critical neighborhood needs that we see in terms of addressing those things more rapidly, and perhaps being able to do more with less because we're leveraging ARPA dollars with other opportunities. So the three kind of goal focus areas that were established were around community health and well-being, infrastructure in the built environment, as well as organizational and community resilience. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through the specifics of these various goal areas, but it does kind of encapsulate several areas that I think have been identified early on to focus on in terms of our recovery, whether it's addressing the needs of our most vulnerable, particularly as we swing into the colder months. Eventually, December is not looking like the colder month, but eventually we'll get there. But to make sure that we're addressing those critical needs and providing direct aid wherever necessary to ensure that our community is safe and healthy during this pandemic, as well as looking at housing, which is something that I think we have recognized as been a key challenge, making sure that we are addressing housing as a priority, and implementing our community health improvement plan, which has a lot of great data, an extensive outreach process around it, and so has already identified a lot of opportunities for us to address our overall health and well-being. So really making sure that we apply some kind of the plans that we've already vetted, we've already worked towards to this implementation. The ultimate goal that I think, just to underscore something that I think was most popular among the commission during the last discussion, was really needing to have a comprehensive strategy to really kind of understand where we need to be right-sizing our infrastructure. What do we have and what are we maintaining that we're probably not doing a great job of because we don't have the funds to that we can't afford to maintain all of that infrastructure, and where are those other needs within our neighborhoods that with investment in infrastructure could create the type of catalytic development and opportunity for those neighborhoods. Those were things that kind of came up quite a bit, as well as understanding that our fiscal sustainability as an organization is really essential and goes hand in hand. And so thinking about how can we make sure that when we come back from this pandemic, whatever that new normal is, we're stronger and more prepared for the future because we have put these actions in place to ensure that we're prepared for that future. So in August, there were several things that were very apparent, which is, first of all, that the pandemic wasn't going anywhere and it still is here. So the commission vetted and approved the allocation for what we call our immediate needs, which supported our ongoing pandemic response, provided $1.85 million in direct housing to 11 different agencies through United Way to help provide housing assistance, rental assistance, utility assistance, and even temporary housing in some cases. And as well, it also incorporated what we are calling a small business resiliency grant and a business scholarship program, which we're launching very shortly, which is an opportunity for small businesses in our community to get the resources they need to adapt their business in this trying time, bringing on new skills that they need to kind of remain competitive and remain viable, but also making sure that we support our small businesses, recognizing how important they are to our local economy. So the next couple slides, and again, you will have a copy of the latest version of this post presentation, but we wanted to kind of let you know these are the things that have been going on with that funding since it was approved. So maintaining our Kmart vaccine facility, mobile vaccination services, ensuring that people have the ability to get to their vaccinations. There's been a lot of technical assistance that's been created to help other local healthcare providers so that they too can provide support with testing and vaccinations. And then obviously, I think one thing to note here too is there's an effort to make sure that we are continually checking in on the progress to date, whether it was the success of our CARES Act implementation or even just tracking the results and impact of these investments in the near term. And then there has been continued work, and this is for many people who've been interested. These are the agencies that received that housing assistance funding through the United Way. And we will be explaining what this Small Business Resiliency Grant is further on. And then finally, I think this one is also a really interesting, kind of a unique effort here, which is our partnership with Bank On, which provides services for the traditionally unbanked communities or underserved communities with financial services that are affordable and much more accessible. So that's something that was recently launched, which was supported by the immediate needs and allows us the ability to offer more to folks where the regular banking market doesn't seem to meet those needs. We also had a vaccine incentive that was approved in October of this year by the Commission to help push more of our staff to opt into taking the vaccine so that we could ensure continuity of operations with the flu season and everything else that's been going on. We wanted to make sure that we weren't hit with a major uptick in cases. And that incentive, just the first round of it, brought us up to about 74% of staff confirming that they have had their COVID vaccine, which is a pretty seismic change. I think we were hovering around 40-something%. Alan House is on the, you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong there, but it was a very significant move and it was definitely helped us to ensure that we will be able to provide that continuity in service. I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen so she can talk a little bit about the small business program and what's happening with the launch this week, where we have partnered with iParametrics to create an online tool to make it as easy as possible to apply for this type of funding. But I'll turn it over to Kathleen if she would like to just share a little bit about this program.
I would just note Mayor Garner is here. He was in the attendee list for a little while and we got him moved over. So he is with us, and welcome, Mayor, to our meeting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm here. Yeah. I have a little technical difficulties with my video, but we're working on it.
We all had technical difficulties for this meeting today. It was not a good day for Zoom, but we're doing the best we can. All right, Kathleen. You're muted, Kathleen.
About 6 weeks ago, we began having meetings with our economic development staff to develop the program that they have now put in place for our application process. And so we've been working with businesses to submit their proposals to us. And so it's a really slick website, and we're really excited about its launch, and we're hoping that that'll happen in the next week or so. There's going to be an outreach made to all our business community so that all the businesses are aware of the application process, and we're going to give them probably about a month to submit their proposals. And then during that time, we have assigned caseworkers to review all the proposals to ensure that they comply with the program. And so in the coming weeks, we'll be giving you an update on the progress and those proposals as they come in.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah.
I think and then as we had noted earlier, we know obviously the pandemic has not gone away as of yet. So there are some additional needs that need to be funded or to continue our ongoing support of the pandemic response. So in very small font here, but intended for as a reference for you after the fact, this is what the health department has pulled together in terms of kind of what those operational needs are to help us continue our pandemic response. So I'm going to just pause there in case there are any questions. I know, Kathleen, you've been working with the health department, so you'll be better and able to answer those questions if there's any specific questions about what this might look like.
Julianne is on as well, it looks like, for questions. I have a question about how the non-emergency medical transportation is different from the transportation assistance for health department clients, and maybe how those two interact.
Sure. So some things have progressed here recently. The non-emergency medical transportation is part of what we hope will be an extension of a large state award that we anticipate getting. That will be community-wide. So for all Wyandotte County residents to be able to access these non-emergency medical transportation. And so our hope is to use these funds to sustain the grant that we thought by now we would already have in hand, but that we anticipate having here shortly. Whereas the other bucket was, if we don't get that non-medical, emergency transportation, that we still have an opportunity to provide rides to the health department for our clinical services for folks in the community. So the difference there being, specific to health department services versus residents countywide, because we know transportation access to healthcare is one of the top 3 barriers to people seeking care in our community. Make sense?
Other questions that we did sort of get this list at the last meeting. If we had a time to take a look at it and have any questions about individual line items. Some, as you'll note, are continuations of things that have been previously funded, while some in the white text are new items.
Commissioner Townsend has her hand up.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This isn't the largest amount of money on the list, but could someone explain a little bit more, flesh out forgiveness for court fees if vaccinated? At first, I thought that had something to do with someone taking off or not being able to take off from work. And then I said, no, maybe what are we saying that if someone is vaccinated and they have some type of court proceeding, that any court fees associated with that proceeding will be forgiven if those people are vaccinated?
Leslie, you want to take this one? Thanks, Commissioner.
Yeah, sure. Commissioner, that's a partnership that the municipal court is working on with Kansas legal services, and it is clients or people who come to the court who agree to participate, who have a suspended driver's license. There's a couple of things that are still being set up about it. We don't have the contract in place, but it's kind of a two-part program. One of it is helping residents in the county who have a suspended driver's license get extra legal assistance to be able to reinstate their driver's license, because that process is actually a little bit complicated. And then there's additionally the ability that if they go through this process, or if they come in contact with this program and they are vaccinated or choose to be vaccinated, then there is a certain, I don't think it's all of the court fees that they have with the court, but a certain amount of court fees would be waived if they either are vaccinated or will become vaccinated. So it's kind of a two-part program, and it's kind of a unique partnership that we had, meant to further incentivize a group of people that we might guess would be lower on the vaccination rate to be able to pursue this. So does that help to answer your question?
Yes, it does, because I identified which court venue and the types of cases involved. So it's not any broader in scope than really suspended driver's licenses, which is good, but okay.
Yeah.
Have we had any experience in the past with this program on the initial round, or would this be a first time?
We're still
down this road?
Yeah, we're still setting it up. That we have an initial $75,000 for the first year. This is a request for a second year of the program, because in talking with the judge, there's a pretty significant amount of people who meet this status, And she doesn't believe that 1 year would be able to work through all of the backlog. There's a backlog of individuals who need this type of assistance. So this is our opportunity to bring needs beyond what we had expressed our first time. And so we know that there will be need beyond the first year. So we decided to ask for a second year of funding. I think this is the first program of any kind like this. I know that there have been amnesty years or amnesty programs in the past. I don't have a lot of information about that. But certainly I hope some of the learnings from that will be incorporated into this.
Okay. One last set of questions. This is over in the right-hand column on the screen. How are we estimating the costs for the Kansas legal service attorneys that would be working on the housing issues, estimating the bilingual housing navigator? Seems like I saw one other, but those two.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Those Kansas legal services attorneys are actually going to be focusing on a broader range of legal supports than just housing issues. I don't know if that got cut off or just simplified. So that's really focused with, there's a lot of needs, immigration needs, housing is one of them. I'm trying to think of there's a couple other categories in the brochure, and I just can't pull them in mind right now, but it's a larger group of legal supports that often people who are low income don't have access to, that get in the way of a lot of really positive things they need to do. And so that those Kansas legal service attorneys are much broader than housing. And then the one below it is specifically for, it says bilingual, but we really are going to work to identify Spanish organizations who serve mostly Spanish speaking clientele, knowing that that's the largest non-English speaking group in our county, and that housing issues are challenging and are especially challenging if English isn't your first language. So it doesn't look like there's a big distinction, but they're actually like pretty significantly different items.
To your question, Commissioner, about how we estimated those.
I'm
did
sorry.
Reach out to Kansas Legal Services early on in this process, and they gave us the figure of $75,000 per year for one attorney. And then for the bilingual housing navigators, we reached out to El Centro, and they gave us the figure of $50,000 per year per bilingual housing navigator would be kind of the range that they would be looking at. And that doesn't mean we have to go through El Centro, but they know the type of position that we're talking about. So we reached out to partners to get those estimates.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions from the committee? There's one other one that I noticed that's one of the new ones that is maybe not self-explanatory, and that's the overdose data to action. If somebody could take a second to address that one.
Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, so overdose data, I'm really excited about this actually. So I'm not excited about the problem, which is a really significant increase in overdoses across the country, including in our county. But we requested funding for a couple years, and there's a third year in this as well, right under that, for drug misuse prevention coordinator to help coordinate. We did a recent assessment of substance misuse and abuse issues in the county, and a lot of stakeholders told us that there is not a lot of coordination between response agencies and also between people who work on prevention, trying to prevent overdoses before they happen. And so that's something that is very much pointed out in ARPA as a big need that they'd like to address, a big need in our community. And so we have a current grant at the health department that's pretty small, $50,000 a year to work on that. And it's provided a little bit, but honestly not enough to be able to do a significant amount of programmatic work on this issue. And so I'm really excited. We're going to be adding a staff person, and then the $200,000 is going to be will allow us to be able to work to actually implement some really significant projects with stakeholders who we've started to work with. And the focus on this is really identifying people across the opioid and substance abuse response continuum of care who see these issues but don't really have an opportunity or time or resources to be able to collaborate to see what we can do as a community that one agency can't do. And so it really is a pot of funding that we'll be able to use through ARPA to pull together different stakeholders and implement projects over the next 4 or 5 years and really see if we can make a significant impact on improving our prevention and our response on this. So so Overdose Data to Action is the current name of the grant. We'll be building on what we've done with that grant in the next several years with this funding.
Thank you. Commissioner Bynum?
Thank you. Commissioner Melissa Bynum here. I have 2 questions. I see a telehealth pilot program for pregnant families at Quindaro Community Center. And so I'd be interested in hearing more about that and who will operate that. And then my general question is, if I heard you at the beginning, some of these requests have requests out to other potential funding sources. And so is it possible that in this $3.37 million bucket, not all of that would be needed? That's it.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner. Julianne Van Loo here. In regards to the Quindaro Telehealth Pilot Program, so that's something we're trying to get off the ground as we speak. We've rented some space there and we're outfitting it with some community health workers and some technology. We know transportation, as I mentioned, is one of the top 3 barriers to care. And what we've heard from a lot of folks is how difficult it is for them to leave their own neighborhoods and community to get down to KU and to manage parking and all of those things. So we're trying the free transportation, but this is another way to try to get at that, where we're trying to encourage women to get prenatal care earlier in pregnancy via telehealth. And so what we're doing is engaging KU and other safety net providers to basically provide that care via telehealth to women who are on site at the Quindaro Community Center while their provider is still on site at KU or elsewhere. But the women who come to the Quindaro Community Center would have the help of a community health worker to help them navigate technology, to help them take very vital very basic vital statistics and those sorts of things while working with their practitioner on their mobile device. So it's an innovative new project we're going to try out. We have a lot of inequities in our fetal and maternal mortality outcomes, specifically in our upper northeast area of our county. And so we're targeting that area to try to see how do we get women into prenatal care earlier. And this is one way we think might work. So that's to answer your first question. Secondly, there's only I think maybe 2 or 3 on here where we are trying to find money from other sources. So there is the possibility, that a little bit of this money could go back into the ARPA pot. But what I think is more important here is that there are items on this list that we'll be trying to get FEMA reimbursement for. So we can get reimbursed through the end of March at this point for things like COVID quarantine and isolation that we have in there, testing and vaccine communication, some of those bigger ticket items. So the problem being that we, of course, need this money up front because FEMA works on a reimbursement model. So we're asking for this money to have on hand to be able to embark on these projects and then intend to recoup as much of that as possible.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Additional questions? I do see there are a couple of hands up in the attendee area. We haven't advertised this as a public hearing opportunity. I suppose it's up to the will of the commission if we want to take those questions immediately. I definitely want to make sure those people get a staff contact. So if they're not asking questions within the recorded meeting, that they can get with staff. And I don't know what staff member would like to volunteer for that.
We use ARPA at WICO KCK, and both Kathleen Van Nachen and myself monitor that daily.
Okay, ARPA@wykck.org would be the email address for public attendees who have questions that they would like to have answered. And that's true for anything going on in today's meeting, not just for this specific item.
And Commissioner, it's important to note, we plan to launch more extensive community engagement,
Great.
including outreach with the folks that are on this call, many of whom worked with us through the CARES Act work and have been ongoing partners with us in the community. And so we look forward to engaging with them more directly around these specific conversations in the new year.
Absolutely. We will be offering those public hearing opportunities. We just had not marketed for that today. Mayor Gardner.
I have a quick question. Thank you. It's a good presentation. How much money is left? And I'm sorry, just what
No
is
problem.
still available out there going into next year? If I missed it, I apologize, but I just kind of looking forward, money that hasn't been allocated for some of the things that you all are talking about today, that the commission and staff have to look at for future allocations. What does that look like?
Kathleen, do you want to jump in on that?
You bet. So this is Kathleen Von Action, the Chief Financial Officer. And as we showed you this earlier, so it starts out at 87 million on the top. It's split between city and county, with the 55 million for the city funds and 32 million for the county funds. Now, the Treasury allowed us gave us some guidelines on how to calculate the revenue loss that we can deposit in amongst all the various operating funds to cover for lost revenue during 2020 and 2021. And based on those calculations, on the city side, it was 31 million, and on the county side, it was 11 million. And the reason we assumed all of those funds into the various operating funds was because it provides the greatest flexibility for how you can spend those funds. So, spending money through these other columns on the right-hand sides, they're restricted by those respective eligible use categories. But putting in the funds as much as possible or allowable into revenue loss gives us the greatest flexibility. So this 31 million and 11 million was budgeted in 2021 and 2022 in those budgets. Okay. So there was a revenue immediate needs report, as you know, that was adopted on August 26th. And this row here it comprises all the immediate needs. And then as a result, some of the immediate needs were paid for from revenue funds and some were paid out of normal ARPA funds. And so that's why we have these two columns separate. So then after August 21st or 26th, sorry, that's this line here on September 6th, or I'm sorry, gosh, on September 30th, the commission approved $1 million to pay for the employee incentive vaccination incentive program that we split 66% on the city side and 34% on the county side. So after everything is done here, and then we just talked about the health department's additional needs, which are 3.4 million here. So right now, what we've got here on the city side is we have 22.1 million still available in ARPA funds to be allocated on the city side. There is still $9.6 million left sitting in the fund balances of the city general fund. 9.6 million.
Can I jump in here and just say, for those who are watching, it's really confusing, I think, to most of us. The revenue replacement funds went into the general fund budget. So that's why they are sort of separated out in there. And Kathleen is saying there's 9.6 million of those revenue replacement funds, which came from ARPA, but which went into our budget. So they're sort of in our pocket in a different way. And then there's this other category, which is ARPA funds as well, but those are not revenue replacement funds, so they didn't go into our budget. Is that accurate, Kathleen?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, that's why we have these different sort of buckets or columns here.
Yep. So on the city side, if you include the amounts that are still sitting in the city general fund unspent, along with the ARPA funds that are in their grant fund, on the city side, it's $31.7 million. On the county side, it's $10.6 million. But as you can see, this part here, this 3.4 million that is in kind of with this dotted line around it, that's because it hasn't been approved yet. So it's still proposed. If you were to approve this $3.4 million, then this 10.6 million would be that much lower. So it'd be 7.2 million. So just so you know. So that's how much money we've got left.
So I'm using my little calculator here, and so that's about a little under $39 million that we have left to allocate, assuming that we allocate those additional needs.
Yeah, that's right.
Additional questions on that or on anything in the additional needs report or anything we've covered thus far, I guess. So let's, as a committee, I think the next decision for us is what we do with these additional needs. And I think several of you had spoken to me and indicated that you were ready to move those additional needs forward to the full commission for a vote, which would be the next step. So, you know, if you haven't spoken to me, or if you have spoken to me and you just want to voice that in the meeting, I think we need to come to a consensus that we're ready to move those additional needs forward. Wes?
Yeah, Commissioner, just one thing I noticed here, earlier this week, that top right one, our health education team, we had budget estimates on the salary of the coordinators. In the first one, that it was a little bit below what the 2 full-time staff we're bringing on to help be a part of this team are going to cost. And so this is for a 3rd year, but we didn't quite ask enough for the first 2 years. So that 157 figure is actually 222, which would then fully fund that program for 3 years. So I just want to, just because it sounds like the committee is about to make action, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that so that we didn't have to go back afterward. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that folks would have.
Commissioner Townsend?
Thank you. So the screen that we're viewing now, we're talking about 3.3 million. And I think this goes to what Mr. McCain was just saying. Over what period of time? We have the immediate needs funding approved in August through the end of the year. So this 3.3 is anticipating needs that will be covered by this request for 2022 and or beyond.
Yeah, Commissioner, that's correct. Yeah, that's for going forward, future needs of the health department through 2022 and part of 2023 as well. As you know, the ARPA funds allow you to spend or obligate money through the year 2024. And so this is money going forward to continue to fight COVID and to address a lot of the public health needs identified as part of the CHIP program.
Okay.
And I would say, Commissioner, this is Julianne in the health department. I don't have a crystal ball. It's possible that other needs would come up, but it is our intent that this is our final large ask of ARPA funds. We do not intend to come forward with another multi-million-dollar ask. Our hope is that what we've already received with this on top will get us through the next couple of years, in addition to the FEMA reimbursement and other sources.
Okay, but this is anticipated year 2022.
That's correct. That's correct.
So,
Through the next
that,
few years.
Sorry, Commissioner, a number of these items will take the programs that are mentioned funded 2022, 2023, and several of them 2024 as well. So it's the funding in this is allocating funding for a lot of these items through the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
That's
moving
right.
forward, okay.
Yes, yes.
Right. So back to, I think it was Mayor Garner's question, how much money is there left, presuming that these needs move on to the commission? What was the number you just rounded off, Commissioner Markley, whatever that number is?
A little
Well-
less than 39 million, is that right? I erased it off my calculator, so.
So let's
I
call
think-
it 30, so let's call it 36. If these.
Well,
are-
no, I
No.
included in my calculation an assumption that we funded these additional needs. So
Okay.
that is, if we fund these needs, there's
Got it.
still the little less than 39 million.
So that number is what, 30 what?
39 million.
Okay, after considering these, if they're funded,
Right.
got it, thank you.
I subtracted that out. So Commissioner Bynum?
Thank you, Melissa Bynum here. We have had, separate from this slide, we have received an email request from those agencies that we funded through the immediate needs back in August for additional funding. And I don't see any discussion of that here. And maybe it's here and I missed it, but what are our plans for addressing that?
I think our hope is still to launch that application for those funds in January, and for this committee to, and that's probably a discussion for our timeline. I think my intent, at least my thought is, as committee chair, is that we would consider those applications in terms of the different buckets, with the understanding that the bucket for community well-being, I might be using the wrong words, Ashley, but that community bucket would be considered first, and that some of those buckets, like the infrastructure bucket that we know will have implications related to the other federal funding, we would consider later. So that's my thought on how that works. Our next meeting, I think we're going to review and set up that application and discuss how we're going to score it, how we're going to set it up, what the questions are going to look like, all of those things, and finalize that application next time we're together, and that application will go live in January. So I think that's our next order of business, is my plan, at least for us as a committee.
Okay.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Thank you. My only question would be whether or not setting up that timeline would leave gaps in coverage that would be potentially detrimental to both not the agencies, but to the people those agencies serve. And so I'll just throw that out. I think that's something that we should follow up with the agencies who are providing emergency assistance to make sure that we, to the best of our ability, avoid gaps in coverage.
Yeah, I think that's a good ask, and staff can hopefully help us out with making that phone call. Certainly, I think faster is better. I also think we've kind of got some awkward timing here with the holiday week in terms of getting it done and then getting applications as well. But I think, like I said, my next goal for us as a committee is for us to get that application up and running as quickly as possible. And then to set a deadline that's both attainable for those agencies in terms of filling out the application, and that, we can spend the time necessary to make sure we're getting the money to the right folks, and that they're going to be able to use it, appropriately. So additional questions? And then again, I think that I'm looking for, Commissioner Townsend.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Did I just understand you to say there were 3 buckets mentioned earlier of that these applications might fall into, that would align with the commission's ideas of areas to be covered? We would not view all of these applications at one time with respect to those 3 buckets. And here's my concern. Commissioner McKiernan rightly identified that there may be needs more important with regard to time of who's being served. My concern is that looking at all types of these applications, are we setting ourselves up for the possibility that by the time we got to the other two buckets, there may be no money left to allocate? I mean, that's.
Yeah, I share those concerns, and I think it's something that we as a committee are going to have to wrestle with, Commissioner Townsend, because we also have all of these additional potential grant opportunities. So this is going to be way more complicated and more complex than the CARES Act funding. Yay for us. It's a good problem to have that there may be additional opportunities for funding, but I don't think we're going to be in a situation, and staff, you can, provide your opinion as well. I don't think we're going to be in a situation where we can just look at all the applications, award all the money, and go home and it's going to be over, because I think we're going to be juggling and wrestling with, is this going to get funded by other federal dollars versus the dollars here? I think we may allocate money to some things, and then it may come back that that's going to be paid for under a separate grant, and then we're going to have to reallocate those funds. I think it's going to be more of a churning wheel than what we experienced with that CARES Act funding, in terms of what money is available and how we as a committee try to allocate those funds to make sure we're leveraging all of those opportunities. So I think that, and again, this is open to this committee's will, but I think that there's going to be, we keep using these immediate need phrases, but we know there are lots of needs out there. So I think what I'm seeing is, I think we're going to get in a flush of applications initially from all different application types. Maybe some of those are for the infrastructure and some are more for the community needs that we've been discussing. I think we as a committee may review those applications as they come in and make a decision that some of those needs are more immediate and that we would like to fund them while we continue to deal with that churning wheel of other potential funding opportunities. So that's sort of how I'm seeing it. But again, it's not going to be my decision, it's going to be our decision. But I don't think we're going to want to wait till we get every application possible in to make a decision about some of those funding needs. So I think it's going to be up to this committee. And like I said, I think that's our next meeting together to discuss how do we shake out those applications that may require more immediate attention from those ones that we may be able to address 6 months from now, as that wheel continues to churn.
Okay. Yeah, my concern would be, the ideal, of course, would be that you see all of them so you know what's out there before you make the decisions. But the next best thing may be just seeing what's there and how time sensitive the request may be. But, that's what was in my mind. Thank you.
Right. And I think we may also, as a committee, decide we want to set aside a certain amount of money to make sure that remains untouched throughout the process until we get every single application in. So I think that's a possibility as well. And you guys can kind of ponder those things for us to discuss in the next and then subsequent meetings, whether we won't really need to make that decision until those applications start coming in, I guess. And then we can say, yes, we want to set this amount aside. But in subsequent meetings, we may decide as a group that we would like to set aside this sort of pot of money over here to say, we're not going to allocate that until we look at every application that comes in and we hit that deadline, where like those other ones that have time sensitive requests, we may consider as applications continue to come in.
Okay, thank you.
Alan?
Commissioners, Alan House, Assistant County Administrator, and I think one of the challenges here that's, and Chair, if you remember back on the CARES, there was kind of that top level allocation where it was, you want to put X amount for educational institutions, you want to put X amount for nonprofit organizations, X amount for business support, and then from within those larger buckets were the allocation, sub-allocation process, and including the running that public application that nonprofits then used to put in their requests, and then were scored and the money was funneled out. And I guess as we go through this process, I want to suggest too that the committee retains flexibility for kind of what are those other big buckets that may be priorities for the commission, that tie back to those commission strategic priorities. and whether that's around parks or public safety or just those broader buckets, so that you don't end up, I think, as Commissioner Townsend suggested, way down the line and realize all the funding has been allocated and you don't have funding remaining for some of these other strategic priorities that the commission may want to pursue.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I mean, I think we're definitely going to be trying to strike this balance between making sure that pressing needs are addressed and making sure that we have money remaining to address the more strategic programs that we might want to enter into. So it is going to be a balancing act. And I think flexibility is going to be critical to that. We don't want to lock ourselves into, we're going to give away every dollar through this application process. Because that just might not be the most efficient or the route that leverages the most funds for this government. So I like to say I have all the answers today, but I think we're just going to have to kind of roll with the punches for a little while with the knowledge that we have some more pressing needs that we want to address as quickly as possible. Kathleen? You're still muted.
Kathleen, I just wanted to point out one thing that might be of interest is that, even if we do allocate, certain activities out of the ARPA funds, if in the future, especially in this given future fiscal year, within the fiscal year, a new grant comes into play and is available to spend on that same eligible expense, even if we have already expended ARPA funds for that respective activity, through the accounting system, we can reclassify the activity spending to the new grant that we may be awarded to in the future or will have awarded. And then that would free up money in the ARPA fund. So we shouldn't feel too, overly restricted by this concern that we may have other grant funds available because, there's a means of reallocating that.
So there are kind of taker backers.
Yeah, that's right.
Depending on where we are in the process
That's
to
right.
make sure.
Especially within the given fiscal year. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that is good information. All right, team, I do still want to make sure that we make a decision on what action, if any, we're taking on these additional needs requests and whether we're ready to move those forward to the full commission. So I'm getting a thumbs up from Brian, Commissioner Townsend, Commissioner Bynum, Mayor, looking for your sense of whether we want to move these additional needs forward for a vote. Go ahead, Commissioner Bynum.
Thanks. I do think, these are important to move forward. I guess my question would be, we will bring them forward to a full commission meeting, correct? And then I imagine we'll have this full discussion all over again.
Right.
But at least we'll bring it with the recommendation of those present serving on this subcommittee, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Townsend, are you prepared to forward this to full commission for consideration?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair. I was trying to find the thumbs up icon, couldn't find it. So yeah, it's worthy of full discussion.
Okay. All right, I'm given to understand the mayor might have stepped away for a moment. So we will leave it in the hands of staff to help us get that on the appropriate agenda and move that forward for approval, for discussion, and then hopefully approval by the full commission with the recommendation of this committee. With that being said, there are no further comments on what we've addressed thus far. Ashley, what else do we have in our PowerPoint to look over today?
Well, I think one thing I'd like to kind of get you thinking about and maybe set us up for the next discussion as we're wrapping up in terms of our time allocated for today is this question of kind of, we've talked a little bit about the why, our values, what we want to see, where we want to go with our recovery. And there has been some deliberation and discussion around some very preliminary possible strategies for how we might actually kind of leverage these funds in our community, trying to address all of these, all of our needs as efficiently and effectively as we can. And so, you know, this is just a summary, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think I've really struggled in trying to think about how do we get this to the next step? Where do we go from here to ensure that you are comfortable in making decisions, that we create plenty of opportunities for our community and our partners across the community to engage with us in planning for our recovery, but also recognizing that we have this money in the bank and we just don't want to let it sit there and not be working for our community, particularly when there are such extraordinary needs at this point. So what I wanted to do is try to walk us through the idea of, in lieu of trying to figure out how the money needs to be categorized and allocated across the 3 core buckets of goals, which we talked about as community health and well-being, infrastructure and built environment, as well as organizational and community resiliency, to think about it in terms of what are the quick wins? What are the things that we can do with a very small amount of dollars, relatively speaking, to the ARPA funds to catalyze the type of opportunity that we need to be not only addressing the needs of our community, but also preparing for future funding opportunities, including infrastructure, Build Back Better, and any number of grants that are anticipated in the near future. So what I've done here, and for your consideration, and these are just 3 examples. They are not the be all end all, but these are 3 examples of potential quick wins that we could adopt as a strategic initiative with a little bit of seed money from ARPA that would allow us to accomplish other things that we have already established as goals. So in this case, taking the technology that we've already started implementation on, but fully pushing it through the entire permitting process to make sure that any step in the development process is streamlined and well supported by technology, which not only alleviates the constraints on our staff to process applications, but prepares us for a better place to partner and work with the unified government in the future to execute on projects such as infill development and renovations. So this is one example of a potential strategic initiative where essentially what we would do is double down on that technology implementation, streamline processes, work with our community partners to understand what works, what doesn't work, where are things broken, and then really build up our capacity as an organization to make sure that our staff are well trained on this technology, so that when housing funds become available, for example, through federal funding, that we are well positioned to take in many new applications to develop and rejuvenate our community in various neighborhoods. So there's a couple different examples of this. The idea is to try to just give you something to think through. And again, you'll have this in the shared document, which we will post online and share with you. But you know, this was another strategic initiative where there has been considerable work over the last several years to look at assessing our infrastructure. It has been, I know, a goal for some of our commissioners on this committee to have a clear plan of action by the end of end of the 2022 calendar year, which is why I have just kind of random placeholders here for timing, but to really get to the question of where should we be right sizing our infrastructure, removing facilities, taking off the burden of maintaining something, and really focusing on delivering high quality public assets that serve neighborhood needs, and really focus on doing what we should be doing really well instead of trying to overextend ourselves. But having a plan for that, I think will set us up very nicely for future infrastructure funding and help with the process of project identification, which is something that we will continue to work with the community on. So like lots of opportunities in that. And then the third idea that I threw out here is really about our organizational capacity to make sure that we have onboarded some support to bring us bring more rigor to our approach of pursuing grant funding, but it is a heavy lift. It's a lot of opportunity, and it requires a certain amount of subject matter expertise. So making sure that we have all of those things in line, whether it's establishing community partnerships, thinking differently about how we want to execute on the implementation of grants, but also making sure when we are awarded grants that we have the ability to take action and put that money to work in our community. And then there are other ideas, and I'll throw out there that, I didn't flesh out fully because I just wanted to kind of give you these ideas, that these are things that we could start doing in January with your kind of go ahead. And I think what I would suggest is that maybe we table this conversation, Commissioner Markley, until the next meeting where we could brainstorm some of those quick wins that you might like to pursue as a committee, give the staff a little bit of time. And I did articulate this. What we could do is this, once you identify the areas you want us to focus on, we could come back to you with a more thought out work plan, timelines, figuring out what the dollars might be tied to any of these strategic initiatives, so that we can take that kind of more fleshed out concept to the commission for review and vetting. And while we're working on those quick wins, then we launch the ongoing effort to engage our community and partners, really define kind of more specificity around how you want to allocate funds with the rest of the ARPA money, and then keep this moving. So I'm going to pause there. That's an awful lot to throw at you with less than 10 minutes left. So I thought I'd just pause and see if there's anything I can do to answer questions about that.
Yeah, so I think just to restate that what staff really wants us to consider is whether there's anything that we can initiate immediately that would serve us down the road in terms of strategic goals the commission has discussed funding. So this is sort of separate. We've talked about all these different sort of little buckets and pieces. So there's sort of the idea of the community well-being and those things we know are going to come forward as more pressing needs. But in terms of, is there a broader commission strategy that comes out of those three buckets that we put together as a full commission, that we want to take a first step on during these early months? And it may be that the answer is no, but staff just thought it was worth discussion and worth consideration, because some smaller steps staff thought were relatively small budget items that might get us down the road much further as we move forward in this process. So I do think probably not time to discuss all of this today, but hopefully it can get your wheels turning a little bit as to whether that's something we want to pursue as a committee, whether we just want to wait till that application process is through, or whether there are some of those smaller steps that we would like to take. And if so, what those smaller steps might look like that we could pursue more immediately. I saw some hands up and they went back down. I don't know if that's because we're going to talk about it later or questions were answered, but anybody have questions about, again, it's just a concept, just a possibility, an idea for us to consider as a committee. Because again, we're just trying to figure out what is that balance between hurry up and get stuff done and let's wait and make sure we address all the other grants that are available. We're just trying to find that balance. Commissioner Townsend.
Well, I took my hand back down, Madam Chair, because I thought, I didn't know if this was for here or a later time discussion, but it's just one quick question. These quick wins, are you, Ms. Hand, contemplating that these would be quick wins funded out of the 39 million ARPA fund dollars or out of UG budget dollars, non-ARPA?
Commissioner Townsend, I appreciate the question. I would imagine that the funding would come from ARPA. There are obviously limitations on the specific types of actions that we would take, but I think that this would build on existing work and other resources that are out there. So I think it would be a limited ask, but I think there might be some needs, for example, to develop that right sizing plan for infrastructure, for example, may require some consultants and some broader engagement, for example, that would need some support to be able to kind of carry through that process. So we'd need to kind of quantify that for you with a little bit more specificity.
Well, look forward to that discussion because people may be thinking, well, the government's spending all the money before we get to it. So I'm just saying that's a concern. So definitely a discussion for another time, but that in itself was the bottom line question I had as I heard it. You know,
yeah,
I like the quick win idea, but where is the money coming from? Thanks.
All right, so that I think leads in nicely. We are you're nearing the end of our time. I think next meeting, we're going to put a majority of our focus on that application process and having an application put together and ready to go out. So I think that's the bulk of our time. I think we'll spend a little bit of time, again, discussing this sort of concept and whether we want to move forward with some of those sort of Kickstarter projects. My husband does a lot of that Kickstarter stuff. He likes that Kickstarter projects, or whether that's not something this committee wants to look at. So we'll continue this discussion in that meeting, but I think the bulk of our time we want to spend on that application because we want to get that done and out as quickly as possible. So that is what I'm looking at as the next steps for this group. I would like to get a series of meetings on the calendar. So I will ask staff and Lisa, on behalf of the commissioners, to work to get maybe a series of 4 or 5 meetings on the calendar. I think that's just easier than going one by one because our calendars fill up so quickly. So that is my hope for this group, is to get a series of 4 or 5 meetings on the calendar in a row, so we kind of know what we're doing next, and then to kind of start as a committee to lay out what those meetings look like, so that if we need additional staff support, or if we have additional information we'd like to gather, that staff can be prepared for those meetings as best as possible, and they can get us that information as quickly as possible. So if that all sounds good, I think we will call it a day for today and look for those calendar invites or requests for your free time to schedule those sets of meetings. And then also just be thinking about this concept of whether there's some Kickstarter things we'd like to do and what those might look like, and be thinking about and looking at that the CARES Act application might give you sort of spur some ideas. I think this one's going to be more complex, probably just because we're in a more complex situation in terms of the funding available. So take a look at that CARES Act application, poke around, see if there are other communities that have applications that they're putting up there, and come prepared to help put together that application and provide some feedback on what it should look like, what questions we should be asking, and what we should be requiring of our applicants as we try to establish a good application process that's both doable for large and small groups and departments, but also that gives us the information and guidance that we need to make good decisions about how to use the money. So I think that those are the homework assignments for this group. And I look forward to seeing you soon at our next meeting. We'll see if when we can, this is the earliest we can get one in here. I know we're going into the holiday season, so that makes it a little more complicated, but we'll squeeze one in as soon as we can. All right, anything else for the good of the order? Thanks, team.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.